Hello, everyone. There's a few uh, guests still filtering in, but we'll go ahead and start. So, welcome and bienvenue to our webinar covering the Parcoursup admissions platform and process. I know that for many of you, attending this webinar may be the kickoff to events this week and next as part of Les Journées d'Orientation, organized by the Consulate of France in Boston. I know these events will shine a spotlight on opportunities within the French higher education system. You'll meet students and alumni of French universities and grandes écoles and learn more about the possibilities of earning a degree abroad. And in addition to being inspiring, we also hope to be as informative as possible. So we'll dive a bit deeper into several common admissions processes utilized by French higher ed institutions. While we may not cover everything, we hope to demystify the process and leave students and their families feeling encouraged and informed. I'll be taking you through this evening's webinar. My name is Natalie Cox, and I'm the Deputy Director of Campus France USA, based at the French Embassy here in Washington, D.C. Campus France is a French public agency of the Ministry of Higher Education and Ministry of Foreign Affairs that works with students from around the world, promoting opportunities within the French higher education system. And just one technical note, and then I'll cover the agenda for this evening. There's a Q&A function in the webinar. Feel free to put any questions you might have in the Q&A. And then also I invite everyone to introduce themselves in the chat of the webinar if you'd like. We'll have an opportunity to discuss and an opportunity for questions and discussion at the end of the webinar, so it'd be nice to see who's in the room. So feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. And I just want to make sure everything is all working. Can you give me a little heads up in the chat to let me know that you're seeing the slide deck on our presentation tonight? I think we'll continue. Okay, perfect. Merci beaucoup, Sophie. So today's webinar is focused on the Parcoursup admissions platform, but we'll start off with just a few remarks on the structure of French higher education and a quick word on dual and joint degrees. And we'll also cover some of the orientation and advising resources that you might want to know about. We'll then jump into who can use Parcoursup as an admissions platform. We'll cover the platform's objectives and functions, the admissions calendar, understanding how to research programs and make program selections, and we'll share resources for orientation and technical assistance. So let's get started. As a very, very quick introduction, so the French higher education system uses the LMD, or Licence Master Doctorat system. So most degrees also utilize the European Credit Transfer System, or ECTS credit systems. And these credits are recognized by many countries in the European Union and around the world. So a licence, or the French undergraduate degree, requires the completion of 6 semesters or 180 ECT credits. An additional 4 semesters or 120 ECTS credits are required to obtain a master's degree, and a doctorate is awarded after the completion of 16 semesters and a total of 480 credits. In France, there are more than 3,500 public and private higher education institutions. There are public universités, grandes écoles, schools of art and architecture, and many more. So all universities are public and are financed by the French government. Located all across France, universities confer national degrees, or licence, master, and doctoral degrees that have equal academic value no matter the institution delivering the degree. Universities cover all academic disciplines: science, literature, language, humanities, medicine, and more. There are also grandes écoles, which are selective institutions, including the École Normale Supérieure, the Institut d'études politiques, engineering schools, business and management schools, and other schools. These grandes écoles can be public and private, and they're recognized by the French government. They typically confer 5-year degrees, and many integrate English as one of the main languages of instruction. Admission to grandes écoles is very selective and can sometimes be based on a competitive entrance exam, and tuition is typically higher than for universities. So to prepare for admission into Grande École, some students choose to attend a 2-year preparatory program called Les Classes Préparatoires des Grandes Écoles. You can learn more about that in the links in the presentation that we'll share with you. There are also 50 public schools of art and design that are directly overseen by the Ministry of Culture, and 20 public schools of architecture. We've linked in this presentation additional resources on understanding the French higher education system and program types. So we're just giving a very, very brief overview here before we jump into Parcoursup. I would also like to mention the growing number of excellent dual and joint degree programs offered collaboratively by US and French institutions. On our website, usa.campusfrance.org, we have an inventory of existing dual and joint degrees at the undergraduate and graduate level. And here you'll see the list of dual and joint degrees offered at the undergraduate level. These programs offer students the opportunity to spend typically 2 years in each country and emerge after 4 years with 2 degrees, one from the French institution and the other from the US partner. These programs are particularly interesting for students who would like to prepare themselves for job markets both in the US and Europe, and who wish to have more substantial study abroad experience as an undergraduate. I'd like to note that these programs typically do not use Parcoursup as an admissions pathway, and they manage their own admissions. The calendar is typically much earlier, so students should contact the programs as of this fall if they're hoping to apply for fall 2024 admission. I know that next week some of you will have the opportunity to learn more about the Sciences Po Columbia dual degree program. And I hope that you'll visit our website to learn more about other similar dual and joint degrees. We'd like students and families to be aware of several important orientation resources, all of which are free and online, that can be references for you as you explore degree pathways in France. So here I'll touch on kind of 3 general types of resources that cover a lot of ground and that we think that you'll find useful. The first is the collection of free online resources from the Campus France agency. So our mission is to make French higher education accessible for international students. However, even for French students who went to high school outside of France, or for parents hoping to learn more about the French higher education system, these resources can be very important. So Campus France has published collections of resource sheets on degree programs, universities and schools, even profiles of French cities from a student perspective, and profiles of student services offered within specific universities in Grande École. You can find, I've included a little video of all of these resources here in the slide, but you can find all of the links to these resource sets in the link that will be shared with you in this presentation. I very much encourage you to review all of these resources. I think they can be exceptional tools as you navigate your options. For those of you who will earn a French baccalaureate, this guide that's published annually, the Guide étudier en France après le baccalauréat, is a very comprehensive resource that can help you explore your next academic steps in France. Again, this guide is a PDF online resource. It's open to all and it's updated every year. It's also linked in this presentation. ONICEP is another wonderful resource you should know about. So ONICEP is a French public organization whose mission is to provide resources for students as they design their academic and professional futures. The ONICEP website brings together resources on various academic and professional tracks, data on job opportunities across fields, and ONICEP also offers a service called Mon Orientation en ligne, which we've linked here in the presentation as well. And Mon Orientation en ligne is a free online advising service. So ONICEP advisors are available by phone, email, and even by chat, and they can work with students and their families individually to help answer questions about academic pathways in various institutions and how that fits in with their professional goals. The third resource category is actually the Parcoursup platform itself. We're going to be diving deeper into Parcoursup soon, but Parcoursup is really not only a common admissions application for students, it's also a database of higher ed opportunities across France and across universities and grandes écoles. Anyone can use Parcoursup to research programs and understand admissions data. Students and their families can start researching programs right away, even without creating an account. I know the Parcoursup admissions portal isn't open yet for this year, but the research database portion of the site is always open, and it's always really an excellent resource. Okay, so let's dive right into Parcoursup. So who should use Parcoursup generally? So Parcoursup is a common admissions platform into first-year undergraduate programs that can be used by students with French nationality or that have the nationality of any other European Union member state, including dual citizens. So any student who has US and French or US and another European dual citizenship, they would be able to use Parcoursup as an admissions pathway into the first year of higher education. And Parcoursup is also used by students of any nationality to access certain types of academic programs. So students of any nationality with any type of secondary school degree who are seeking admission to a selective non-university program that's present in Parcoursup would utilize Parcoursup even if they are not European Union citizens or if they do not have a French baccalaureate. I included a very detailed table of these eligibility regulations in the presentation, and it's also linked here, so don't worry if you still have questions, but that's the broad overview. Generally, students without French or European nationality and without a French baccalaureate, if they're seeking entrance into the first year of a licence program, for example, or other types of university programs, they'll use another admissions procedure called the Procédure de Demande d'Admission Préalable, or DAP, and that's through another platform called Études en France. That's a platform of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And I will be giving another webinar tomorrow evening on the Procédure DAP for those of you who might be concerned, who might be interested, or who might be utilizing that process. So students that don't have a French or European nationality and who don't have a French baccalaureate, if they're seeking admission into any licence program or any first year medical program in a French university, they would use Études en France. Or if they're seeking admission into a selective university program, they would use Études en France as well. Again, here I've included a more detailed table of the eligibility requirements for both admissions pathways, and it's linked in the presentation as well. Okay, so I'm going to start with the overview of the Parcoursup platform and its structure and objectives. So Parcoursup is a public national admissions platform and common application for French higher education. Candidates can submit one application to be considered by many higher education institutions and by many degree programs within those institutions. So the Parcoursup platform also provides information about each program and important admissions data such as competitiveness and selection criteria. Except for the few schools that are not connected to Parcoursup, most higher education pathways in France are accessible via the platform. It's actually around 21,000 academic programs that are accessible via Parcoursup. Parcoursup should be considered really both as a database of higher education programs in France and as a common admissions application. I think perceiving Parcoursup in these two ways is really useful. This is why we mentioned earlier that Parcoursup itself is really a wonderful orientation and advising resource for students and their families at all stages of their research. So even students who are a few years away from applying to university may still use Parcoursup to research opportunities, schools, academic programs, and to prepare for the future. Students and parents and their advisors can start researching academic programs on Parcoursup right away, even without an account, and even prior to the opening of the application period. And this is something I strongly recommend. It's really a wealth of information and is an invaluable advising resource. I'd like to talk now about the principles, objectives, and functions of Parcoursup. Parcoursup is built on very strong principles of equity, transparency, and non-discrimination. It has improved year after year to respect these guiding values. Excuse me. Its objectives and functions are to provide a centralized common application for 21,000 higher education programs, to offer one admission pathway and a national and harmonized calendar across programs. High school students will be accompanied by reminders from the platform during the whole process, and also by their high school counselors and teachers if they're studying in a French curriculum school. All programs are presented in a consistent and comprehensive, transparent way on the Parcoursup database. Each program covers admissions data to give students a robust understanding of the admissions criteria before applying. The platform provides freedom of choice for all candidates in their program selections. The program selections are called les vœux. The selection is not imposed. It should be related, their selection should be related to their interests, both academic and personal, to their academic strengths, or their expertise in high school. Parcoursup is governed by a legal charter that every higher education institution must respect. It focuses on ways to ensure equity of opportunity for candidates and transparency of the admissions process for all schools and academic programs. As an example, selection criteria for each program are clearly communicated, and their degree of importance must be mentioned as well. Applications are anonymous. The higher education institutions connected to Parcoursup do not accept applications outside of the Parcoursup platform. You can read more about the legal charter governing the Parcoursup platform and admissions pathway here. It's linked on the presentation that you'll receive. So just a quick note, the calendar for fall 2024 admissions for Parcoursup isn't yet published on the Parcoursup site. So some of the visuals in this presentation utilized last year's calendar, so they'll give indicative dates. Respecting the calendar is probably the most important piece of advice for Parcoursup success. So there are absolutely no exceptions for missed deadlines. Again, this year's calendar for fall 2024 isn't yet published, so some of the visuals refer to last year. The first phase of the calendar, which will likely open in November 2023, is devoted to developing the students' academic plans. So students have several months, typically between November and January, to utilize the research database, explore their options, and really really spend an intentional few months utilizing all of the advising resources and the Parcoursup database itself to design their academic plans to inform their program choices. So this is a really critical moment for decision making that's supported by teachers, counselors, and parents. It's the time to gather as much information as possible, carefully consider your academic options and how they align with your professional opportunities. Um, uh, uh, we also like to say that the 2 months of exploration recommended by the official Parcoursup calendar should be really considered as the final step of research by students and supported by their families. So of course, students will have spent likely the last year or last several years of high school considering the types of academic programs that they're interested in. So, start earlier than November 2023, but that you have an official few months as part of the Parcoursup calendar dedicated to this exploration. So then from mid-January to about early to mid-March, students can create an application, they can complete their profile, and they can start to make program selections. Typically, no changes to program selections can be made after the March 9th deadline. That was last year. Typically, there's an early to mid-March deadline for making all program selections. Then students have 1 more month to finalize their application and provide other requested documentation. So during this one final month until early April, students can withdraw program selections, but they can't add any new ones. But they can still make changes to their supporting documents and their profiles in the application. The deadline to confirm all program selections is typically in early April. Without confirmation, the application is not submitted to the selected program. So that's a very important deadline. We'll talk about this later in the presentation. So now that you have kind of a broad general idea of the calendar, I'll give an overview of some of the required documents. But please note that requirements may evolve as the application for this year isn't yet published. So students will need to submit their grades or academic results. So if they're earning a French baccalaureate, their report cards are automatically transferred, not automatically, but the report cards are transferred by administrators at their French curriculum school, which includes grades from the three trimesters of 11th grade and the first 2 trimesters from 12th grade. Please note that this slide refers to the required documents for applicants that will hold a French baccalaureate. The next slide, I'll speak about requirements for students who will not have a French baccalaureate. So students will also be invited to present statements on their centers of interest and activities. So students can share details about their activities, their extracurricular interests, and they should prepare 4 1,500 character responses to several prompts. The prompts are all linked in this application. And they might change this year. But last year, the 4 prompts were asking the student to explain their experiences in teaching, tutoring, or working with children. The second is around any volunteer work or community engagement experience. The third is around professional work experience or internships. And the fourth centers on cultural experiences, athletic experiences, time spent abroad, or time studying another language outside of school. They also have an opportunity more broadly to share about any other extracurricular achievements. So then the projet de formation is a cover letter, again, around 1,500 characters, that must be provided for each of the program selections or each of the vœux. It should highlight the candidate's experiences, show consistency between the program chosen and the student's project, and explain why the student wishes to study in this program. It's very discouraged to have a standard text for all program selections. Really good, cover letter or projet de formation that's specialized for each program selection can make the difference between two candidates. So a specialized projet de formation for each program selection is necessary. So there's another section in the application that allows students to explain their preferences. And this means that students will explain, they have the opportunity to explain what their priority program selection is. Again, the students don't have to rank their program selections, but they do have the opportunity to explain if they have a priority. If they're applying to academic programs in law or sciences, there may be specific questionnaires for these applicants to be completed by the student. Each student will also have a fiche à venir. So if students are in a French baccalaureate program, this fiche will be provided by the school for each of the program choices. And we'll look at that a little more detail. There may be complementary documents that are requested for specific situations as well. So let's look at the fiche à venir. The pedagogical teams in French education affiliated schools will provide one fiche à venir for each program selection, for each vœux. It's important that students know the contents of this fiche à venir and understand what information will be provided by the school. So their grades will be provided, the rank of the student in the class against the number of students. The teachers are invited to present a qualitative assessment of elements for each subject. Also, they'll present a qualitative assessment about other types of transversal skills, such as their methods of work, their independence or autonomy, their engagement in the class, their leadership skills. And they'll this will be this fiche à venir will be transmitted directly by the school. There's also a recommendation of the head of school or the principal and the teacher's council regarding the chosen program of the student, which typically centers on the coherence between the student's choice of program and their chances of success. So if an applicant is a French or European student that will earn a US high school diploma or an IB diploma and not a French baccalaureate, the application may be slightly but not significantly different. So for example, that student without a French baccalaureate will be responsible for entering manually the information about past years of schooling. They'll upload manually their official transcripts to the platform, for example. I want to note also that students can upload all of their transcripts or report cards in the original format. So we get this question a lot if students need to translate their grades into French or obtain some kind of equivalency. So no translations, conversions, or equivalencies are needed. Students can select the grading scale in the platform if they're not graded on the 20-point scale. There are various other grading scales that an applicant can select. And they can also enter in manually another grading system if they don't see it in the platform. And so they'll give a description in French of each of the last 2 years of schooling, 11th and 12th grade. You'll include the main fields of study, names of the classes, number of hours, your rank in the class if possible, and any other optional language courses. This is all part of the instructions in the platform as well. So don't worry if this is a lot of information. Candidates also have the ability to enter information for the last 6 years of their schooling, but it's the last 2 that will be obligatory. So students applying from outside the French school system are not required to provide a fiche avenir for each program selection. However, students may provide additional information and optional documents that touch on what would be transmitted in the fiche avenir. For example, recommendations from teachers or comments from teachers around their various program choices. In French language proficiency, students can upload results from an official French language proficiency test. It's typically not required for Parcoursup, but depending on your level of French or depending on the language of your schooling, it might be required prior to administrative registration or prior to actually enrolling in a program that you've been admitted to, if you're accepted. So it will really depend on your background, but in some cases, if you are a student that is not a native French speaker and maybe you didn't have the majority of your primary and secondary school taught in French, you might want to be prepared with results from an official proficiency test such as the DELF or DALF or the TCF. Students, just one more thing on students without a French baccalaureate. You won't have what's called an IEN, which is a National Student Identification Number. But that's completely fine. You'll just indicate in the platform that you don't have one. So generally, the application processes for students outside the French system is nearly identical. We do think it's a good idea to complement your application with information that would have been in the fiche avenir, such as your ranking within the class whenever possible. There's really not a template for how to present this type of information. But I think you would work with your teachers or your counselors to obtain recommendations that would be relevant for your programs of study. You could create a kind of annotated annex of your 11th and 12th grade transcripts and ask your teachers to write several qualitative comments about you around the evaluation categories that we'll cover in the next couple of slides. Again, there's really no template, but utilizing the fiche avenir as kind of an inspiration for some supplementary documents that you might submit in this application if you're applying without a French baccalaureate is a good idea. Generally, you want to be as comprehensive as possible, but also concise, and put yourself into an admissions officer's shoes. So find a way to include in your application the materials and information that would have been in the fiche avenir, again, is a good idea. It's important to note, again, just wanting to underline that there's no requirement of French translations of your grades or any conversion of your grades to a French scale or documentation of equivalency at this Parcoursup admissions stage. So generally, in terms of these program selections, students may select a maximum of 10 program choices, also called vœux, with a certain number of sub-choices, and it depends on the program. So program choices don't need to be ranked by the candidate. Again, admissions officers in each program do not see the other program selections that an applicant has chosen. So this is a way to guarantee equity in the review process. Students have typically between January and March to select final program choices, even though they usually have until April to make changes to the rest of their application. And in some cases, if you're applying to a specific type of academic program in multiple institutions, each institution is considered a sub-choice and isn't counted against the total limit of 10 selections. One example is that applying to medical school, applying to first year PASS programs, first year of medical studies in the Paris region. Actually, any PASS program in a public university in the Paris region is considered a sub-choice and doesn't count against the 10 choice limit. So there are a lot of exceptions like this. This was just one example. But generally the limit of 10 choices can be extended because many choices actually count as sub-choices, depending on the discipline and the institution. So some strategies to keep in mind. It's preferable to choose both selective and non-selective programs for maximum chances of acceptance. Writing a very high quality projet de formation for each program selection. Again, one that is specific to your program selection to present yourself in the most comprehensive way possible and in a way that really aligns with the program. That's absolutely imperative. Being as specific as possible about extracurricular activities in that activities and interests section is very important. You can highlight strengths that might not appear in your academic records in new and creative ways. Clearly indicating your preferred program with a detailed motivation in the dedicated section is also a good strategy. Even though students do not need to rank their program choices, they have the ability to write a paragraph about their program preference. And so we encourage students to do that. Spend time on research, obviously, utilizing some of the resources maybe that we've shared today and your advising offices at schools. Contact student ambassadors or counselors with questions. So another really wonderful thing about Parcoursup is that every program profile includes contact information for student ambassadors and contact information for admissions counselors within that program. So really taking advantage of those resources is a recommended strategy. So you'll be able to research programs and add your vœux to your application using this searchable database. You'll see that you can sort programs by program type, by academic track, and you can use an interactive map. You'll see each profile initially shows the number of places available for each academic year, and will show the acceptance rate for the past year. So the acceptance rate or the taux d'accès. So clicking into the program, students will see the full profile of the program, including an overview, evaluation criteria, admissions data, contact information for the admissions office and student ambassadors. It's really a wealth of information. So read the program profiles carefully to ensure that your application and background aligns with the program description. You can also use the favorites list to save programs that you're interested in without adding them to your application. So this is a good way to kind of keep a list of bookmark programs that you want to come back to later as you're doing your research. So in terms of the evaluation criteria, candidates are evaluated across 5 broad categories. Their academic results, their other academic skills and methodological skills. They're also evaluated on a third category of savoir-être, which is a non-academic criteria that includes autonomy and independence, dedication, engagement, focus within the class, organizational skills, team spirit, openness to the world, intellectual curiosity, and other types of non-academic skills. A fourth broad evaluation category is motivation, how well they understand the academic program that they're applying to and how well it aligns with their professional and academic objectives. And this fourth category is really about their readiness to succeed in a particular academic program. The fifth category is on engagement in other types of activities, their other centers of interest, and other types of extracurricular engagement. So we've included here on the slide a brief description in English of each of these 5 categories, and we've also linked a detailed description of the 5 categories at the bottom of the page. Again, this presentation will be shared with you, including the links after our webinar. Page 4 and 5 of the linked document give a detailed definition of these 5 categories and subcategories by which the student will be evaluated. But we wanted to, all of the supporting documents are in French, and one of the goals with this presentation is to present some of this information in English for families that might not be Francophone. So we've noticed that just one kind of lingering perception and maybe misconception that students and families in the US have of French higher education admissions is that the French admissions process only considers academics and doesn't consider extracurricular activities, student engagement, or other kind of non-academic strengths of the candidate as much as maybe perhaps the admissions team at a US university would. Broadly, this is really not the case. You can see very, very clearly in the evaluation criteria of the programs that are, and these are published on Parcoursup, that extracurricular considerations are important for most programs. So continuing on the evaluation criteria, within this section on Parcoursup, you can see you have this menu of 6 kind of tabs on each program profile on Parcoursup. Within the Comprendre les critères d'analyse des candidatures, you'll see information about how candidates are evaluated. Programs rank each criterion by the importance they place on that category, and they're required to publish this information on their profiles. You'll see that each program has a grille d'analyse, which gives a measure of the weight placed on each category in the evaluation. So most programs take a fairly holistic approach to evaluation, giving all categories some weight in the evaluation process. Other programs might focus more exclusively on academic achievement, but students should really make sure they understand the composition of the evaluation criteria for each program they're interested in so that they can craft an application that aligns with the evaluation criteria that are weighted, that are given importance by the program. For example, if all of the students' program choices place importance on extracurricular activities and student engagement, they should make sure to include a fairly comprehensive, robust description of their activities in the activities section of the profile. On each program profile, you'll also find information on supplementary requirements, information on written and oral competitive entrance exams if they're required, and on any other specific requirements for the program. So within the same section on the program profile, you can usually access a full admissions report for that program from the previous year. So in this case, we were looking at the 2022 admissions cycle for fall 2022, which was the last previous year published. So you'll find this report linked at the bottom of the page. It's called the Rapport d'analyse des candidatures. And if you click on the report, you can see really a detailed summary on the competitiveness of the program, exactly what admissions officers looked for in candidates across all 5 evaluation criteria. It's really an incredible amount of information. So we really encourage all students and families to take the time to read these reports carefully, to bookmark them, highlight them, and make sure that you keep them on hand as you're putting together your application. It's also a very valuable resource, I imagine, for college admission, for college counselors and advisors within high schools, if your students are interested in pursuing undergraduate programs in France, whether or not the students will use Parcoursup as an admissions platform, utilizing the Parcoursup database to have a very detailed picture of admissions data for these programs is really quite useful. Okay. So let's look at the admissions calendar. So we looked earlier at the application calendar, but now we'll look at the admissions phase. So last year, between June 1st and July 13th, admissions committees within French institutions reviewed student applications, and they published their admissions decisions. So between June 1st and July 13th, students started to receive admissions decisions from universities. So students are notified by email and text message, if sometimes, if it's applicable, as soon as the institution makes a decision. Their answers can be either they've been accepted. They can also be accepted on and placed on a waiting list with a waiting list number, or they can be refused. So if admitted, students will receive a specific deadline by which they need to accept or reject an offer. And the deadlines may vary by program, but it's important to be very, very responsive. Some of the time, students only have a few days to answer, and sometimes it's only even 1 day. So during this period of time, if students are waiting for their admissions results, it's good to stay connected and know that students may need to be responsive and may even need to give an answer within a couple of days. That being said, even if students are admitted to a program and they accept the offer, they can still leave the remaining program choices in place for consideration. If they're admitted to another program that they find more appealing, then they can still accept it. A student can only accept one offer at any given time, so they would have to reject the previous offer to accept a new one, but they can keep their options open in that way. Admissions are made on a rolling basis throughout the entire admissions phase, and places become available as soon as other students reject admissions offers and make their program selections. So the waiting lists move quite quickly as well. Just to give you an idea, in June 2022, in the summer 2022, over 85% of Parcoursup users had received at least one admissions offer as of July 15th. Okay. Certain programs require additional written or oral exams prior to full admission. If that's the case, information on this exam or interview period will be found on the program profile. Between mid-June and mid-September is the phase complémentaire for admissions. So starting on June 15th, students can actually modify their program selections. They have the possibility to actually add 10 more program selections in programs that have available places. So it's important to note that there are some apprenticeship programs that have a different admissions calendar. And sometimes students can select apprenticeship programs later in the year and throughout the summer. Um, uh, Also, just one note here, students who are not European and who will not have a French baccalaureate may not be eligible for the complementary phase. They would be applying for a very specific group of programs for which this complementary phase may not apply. So once a candidate has definitively accepted an offer and once he's or she has graduated from high school, they must register directly with the higher education institution. They need to enroll in the program, and that happens outside of Parcoursup. So Parcoursup is the admissions platform, but doesn't manage enrollment. Okay. So we covered quite a bit of ground on the Parcoursup platform. I'll leave you with a few really great resources that you can turn to as you're using Parcoursup, both for advising and orientation, and also for technical questions or specific questions about the application. So first, there's a very informative series of video tutorials on YouTube all about Parcoursup and various stages of the admissions cycle. You can find the Parcoursup playlist on the YouTube channel of the French Ministry of Higher Education. It's very, very informative. I definitely encourage students and their families to check it out. Additionally, we mentioned ONICEP earlier, but it's such a great resource for students and families. We encourage you to browse their website. You can also use ONICEP's orientation service, Mon Orientation en ligne. We think it's really provides a wealth of information, and it could be just another kind of complementary point of reference for advising. Our third recommendation is just a reminder to be proactive about using Parcoursup itself to the fullest. Parcoursup offers Facebook and Instagram lives, webinars, and also has a telephone helpline and an email assistance possibility. They have also a menu of external advising resources that we encourage you to browse in detail, and we've linked that in this document. Additionally, we've linked resources all throughout this presentation, and we'll share the PDF, including the links, with you after the webinar. Yeah. So we hope that this evening's presentation was useful and maybe even energizing. Sometimes I know it's easy to be a bit adrift in a sea of online information, but we hope that we've pointed you in the right direction of some navigational tools that you can use to confidently establish a path forward for the coming months and years. So thank you, merci. And with that, I'll open the floor to questions. I see that, let's see, I'm just opening the Q&A. We don't have any questions yet. Please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A or in the chat. So Sophie says, thank you. She'd like to learn more about the dual degrees. To clarify, to apply for the dual degrees, do they use Parcoursup? Yeah, typically, so the dual degrees, really wonderful question. And there are really a growing number of really interesting dual degrees at the undergraduate and graduate level. The dual degrees typically don't use Parcoursup. The dual degrees between French and US universities typically are they might have all of their own admissions processes. I don't think a student can be admitted directly into a dual degree via a dual degree with the U.S. institution directly via Parcoursup. So you might want to check with the programs themselves. They might have kind of various ways that they accept admissions applications. Yeah, but there's really quite a lot of options. And again, I'll just kind of click back to the slide on dual degrees. We did a little inventory in the last couple of years, and there may be others, but I think we have a pretty comprehensive list of the existing dual and joint degree partnerships. There are about 45 in total, but much fewer at the undergraduate level, which are here. But Johns Hopkins, Columbia, North Carolina State with Schema. They have really interesting programs. The dual programs between Sciences Po and Columbia and Sciences Po and Berkeley are kind of long-standing partnerships. There are some really interesting programs in French and French language and cultures. One program that's relatively new um, between Franche-Comté and the University of Northern Iowa. So yeah, several really interesting options. Are there any other questions? Feel free to pop them in the chat or in the Q&A. And also, if you have a question, so everybody is muted automatically, but if you have a question, you can pop your question in the chat, or just give me a heads up in the chat, and I can unmute your microphone, so you can ask a question out loud as well. Just as a little note, it's interesting because our office at Campus France USA at the embassy, we don't actually kind of accompany students individually in the Parcoursup process. We do play a kind of closer role in accompanying students in the Études en France process, so students who don't have a French baccalaureate or who are not European. And so we weren't as familiar with this process, but about 6 months ago, we started looking in more detail into the Parcoursup process to be able to provide students and their families with more resources. And it's just an incredible platform and an incredible resource. As I kind of dug deeper, I realized just how much information students have at their fingertips through Parcoursup, and it's quite impressive. And so just knowing a few tips, I think, I hope students and their families will feel really excited and prepared to start this process. So Sabine says, are there some studies which are not using Parcoursup? So yes, so there are some admissions pathways that do not use Parcoursup. So certain Sciences Po degree programs, for example, do not use Parcoursup. Certain programs in certain undergraduate programs at some private école de commerce or business schools, for example, don't use Parcoursup. There are some programs that do not use Parcoursup. And there's another question, how is the geographical sector of students defined in Parcoursup? if several similar vœux are made but in different regions, might this be considered? Um, that's a good question, Marilyn, and I don't think I have the answer. I believe that, um, you know, looking at some of the research we put together around the evaluation criteria, I think that there could be more information in some of these documents, um, particularly this one linked on the evaluation criteria slide, page 19. But I'm not really, that's not, I don't have that response, but that's a great question. It might be a question also for the Parcoursup um, um, assistants. Good, thank you, Sophie. Merci beaucoup. Well, thank you, everyone. Just kind of waiting to see if there might be any additional questions in the chat. But I really hope that this was useful. Again, we will send everyone here the PDF of the webinar. It's also been recorded. So we'll send you the recording in the next few days and the PDF as soon as possible so you have the links. And thank you very much for spending some of your precious time in your evening talking about Parcoursup. Merci beaucoup. I think with that, we'll conclude the webinar. So thank you very much. And we'll be following up very shortly. Bye-bye.